This is Theater Talk. I'm Susan Haskins. Here with me is my co-host, Michael Riedel of the New York Daily News.
Jekyll and Hyde is one of those rare Broadway musicals that has defied some critical barbs and gone on to be a big hit. Its composer is Frank Wildhorn. He has a brand new show that's opening up this week, The Scarlet Pimpernel, and we are delighted tonight to be joined by Frank Wildhorn. Welcome, Frank.
Hi.
So, Frank, how does it feel to sort of give the old blow-off to some of the prominent, influential drama critics in New York who did not care for Jekyll and Hyde?
Well, you know, Jekyll and Hyde from 1990 was always a people's musical. It was, you know, the people always have reacted to it. And that's who I write for, and those are my critics. Those are my masters. That's who I write for. And they let me know in a louder and bigger way than anybody can, you know, whether they're enjoying it or not and whether it's going to have a life or not. And thank God they're there for us.
But were you prepared for, or did you expect to get some of those vicious reviews, particularly from the Times? That was especially nasty, I thought. Were you prepared for that kind of a negative attack on the show?
I don't know if one is ever really prepared. I wasn't surprised, given the history of the Times reviews of pieces that really mixed the, you know, the pop music vocabulary, you know, in a theatrical sense, going back to Weber's shows. But again, going back to Weber's shows, at the end of the day, like I said, you know, the people in the audience you write the show for really is your master. I didn't really understand too much of that New York Times review. In particular, he said something about the music sounded like Light FM, but as you know, Michael, when you turn in your car and you hear Light FM, all you hear is hits. So I thought that was okay. So, you know, I don't know.
And audiences seem to agree with you. Frank, you are a pop composer, and in fact, I often refer to you as a pop composer in my columns, and you always get upset at me. Why don't you want to be known as a pop composer? What's wrong with bringing pop music to Broadway? That seems to me what you're all about.
Yeah, first of all, it is. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. But you know, I'm writing in the milieu of the theater. You know. And so I'm a composer writing for the theater. When I write for Whitney Houston, critics and people who have written about me don't say R&B composer. Mm-hmm. When I was commissioned by Yuri Gregorovich from the Bolshoi Ballet to write a full-length ballet for the Bolshoi, they didn't say classical composer Frank Wildhorn. Mm-hmm. I'm a composer, and I work in the different worlds that, you know, I work in, and leave it at that, you know. Do
you think there's some snobbery built into the Broadway community labeling you a pop composer? Have you felt that?
You know, it's funny. The obvious answer to that, of course, is yes. But the word pop is such a misunderstood word and has such a bad rap that sometimes I think some of the people that label me a pop composer don't know what they're talking about.
Well, what is pop?
Pop is popular. You know, was George Gershwin not a pop composer? Mm-hmm. You know, if George Gershwin and Cole Porter and the greats and my heroes of the American musical theater were alive today, would they not be trying to write music for the populace? I mean, in those days, you know, before the advent of the record business in the big way, you know, it was about sheet music. And they were out there trying to sell as much sheet music as they can, because that was the only way for their songs to get out into the world. And I believe that then, and I believe it now. I mean, that's what it's about to me.
Frank, your new musical, The Scarlet Pimpernel, opens Sunday. Is that pop?
Sure, I wrote it for the populace, so of course it's pop. And again, you know, The Scarlet Pimpernel, like Jekyll and Hyde, it's really interesting. It's the collaboration between the popular music industry and the theater industry which made it a reality. The fact that it exists at all has a lot to do with the fact that we did an album on EMI Angel with Linda Eder, Peebo Bryson, Chuck Wagner, Dave Clemens, and Linda and Peebo, who was playing a French guy on the album, had a top 40 hit with You Are My Home. And that album was heard by the producer Pierre Cosset. Kathleen Raid, another producer, played it for him. And that really started the ball rolling and getting the show going again.
So for those who don't know, Scarlet Pimpernel is about the French Revolution and comes from a famous novel. And
they seek him here, they seek him there. Those Frenchies seek him everywhere.
And a Leslie Howard movie.
He was one thing during the day, and yet he was something else. And there's a little bit of Indiana Jones in there, and that swashbuckling sensibility, and very commercial, very pop.
And you have a new guy playing the Scarlet Pimpernel, an actor we haven't seen before, Douglas Sills, I believe.
And you know, we auditioned in L.A. and he came in, and what did he do? He did Someone Like You from Jekyll and Hyde. And a lot of people, as you know, do Jekyll and Hyde stuff in auditions, but I've never heard a guy do Linda's song.
Right.
And he did it wonderfully, and that opened the door for him.
Now, in the interest of full disclosure, we should say that Linda Eder is your longtime girlfriend, and wedding bells perhaps in the air. She's the star of Jekyll and Hyde, a radiant performer.
In the spring, in May.
Frank, you're from Los Angeles. You were out there a long time in the music business.
Originally from here, though.
Originally from here, correct, yes. You could, I suppose, be like many popular composers and stay out there by the kidney-shaped pool writing songs as you have for Whitney Houston and Liza Minnelli and lots of others and make gobs and gobs of money. Why come to Broadway and, put up with annoying people like me? People sniping from the sidelines and the big risk that Broadway is.
Because when I was at USC in 1979, John Houseman, remember John Houseman?
The old actor.
Under his auspices and a man named Rick Toscan, they put on a student show that I wrote. The show was terrible. It was called Christopher. I wrote the book, music, and lyrics for it. God, when I listen to it now, I go, oy. But I fell in love. I fell in love with the process. I fell in love with being a composer and having the challenge of taking a piece that, as opposed to writing in the box of a pop song, 3.5 minutes, get to the quote in 45 seconds, etc. The challenge of writing for a 2.5 hour evening, and all the things I could do as a composer in doing that. And that really started a love affair with the theater. And I really wanted to do theater, ever since. I mean, people think of me as a guy who's been doing pop, who's now doing theater. There's a reason for that. It's the pop world that really gave me the financial freedom, to do the theater. As you know, no one pays you anything to do theater. You can have dinner with what you get paid for to do theater.
Right.
I was going to say, it has a great back end if you're successful, but it's an enormous gamble.
Yeah.
Right.
And thank God for the pop business and the record business, because that's what gave me the financial freedom to spend the years it took for Jekyll and Hyde and Scarlet Pimpernel and now Civil War and Havana and Svengali, etc.
From your perspective, as kind of an outsider in the Broadway world, why do you think, for the longest time, really until Andrew Lloyd Webber came along, Broadway, and particularly Broadway music, became so rarefied and so removed from the mainstream?
Well, you're right. It really was and has been for a while. Puff Daddy sold more records than probably every Broadway cast album sold together this week, in his first week out. Babyface and Diane Warren and David Foster, and these are the people who are writing the popular music of the day, and it's not coming from theater. But I think it can come from theater. It should come from theater. And in fact, if it doesn't start coming from theater, then what is the future of theater if we don't cultivate new audiences? And those new audiences have to be brought up with a musical vocabulary they can understand and that they can enjoy and relate to and be comfortable with. Etc.
I can't believe Hootie and the Blowfish is outselling Steel Pier. I mean, the boggles. But what do you think?
Okay, but going back.
Yeah, well, how did it happen, though? How did Broadway sort of take itself? How did Broadway all become about Stephen Sondheim?
I think it was a combination. You really can't point at one thing. Certainly, people on Broadway will point to Elvis or the Beatles or something like that.
They blame rock music for
Right.
the demise of the Broadway sound.
But the thing is that radio rules the music industry, and radio in America rules how the pop music world works. And I guess in the late 50s, early 60s, as there were more and more radio stations, and they were looking for a bigger audience and a bigger viewership, they found that the music that they needed to play to reach that was the music of Elvis and the Beatles and the pop acts of the time. And so radio in America became much more it became the thing that represented what the popular music was. And what happened in theater, I mean, I wasn't around, in the late 50s. I was born in 58, so I'm not really sure what happened, but evidently what happened in the late 50s, early 60s, and continuing on, is less and less people who wrote the popular music of the day went into theater, and theater kind of closed ranks and kind of became its own world. And then what happened through the 60s and 70s, and this is not, there has been great work done. This is not a criticism of the work at all. This is just an observation of the business of it, is that the New York theater community became one thing and the rest of the world was something else. And though there were exceptions once in a while, like a Hair or a Jesus Christ Superstar, for the most part, I couldn't myself, I'm from the generation I am, as we all are. We're raised on the music we listen to, and I couldn't relate to much of the music coming out of the American theater in the 70s and 80s.
I think, though, that Stephen Sondheim was the happening thing. It's that a lot of people in in the 70s or 80s were still writing imitation Rodgers
Very
and
rarefied, though,
Hammerstein.
even Stephen Sondheim.
Yeah, but
he
it's
had one-hit song, "Send in the Clowns."
well, no, but he had some fabulous
No,
scores.
but his
Follies
stuff,
and
his stuff never sold the way
well, Michael,
pop music does.
Selling is not everything in the theater.
Susan's just sucking up to Stephen Sondheim, so he'll come on the show.
Look, Stephen Sondheim is brilliant. He's a genius. His voice is loud and clear in the last 25 years, both as a lyricist when he worked with Bernstein and Julie Stein, etc., and in his own work. The point is, though, is that there was a time on Broadway where there seemed to be room for everything. Light opera, vaudeville, more serious stuff, you know, and people were pushing the envelope in all kinds of different ways. As it seemed in the 70s and 80s, there wasn't room for a lot of different things. And my generation saw that, and so they went away from theater in droves. And in fact, to this day, some of those people that I write with who are a lot more successful than I am.
Do they think you're
as
fool
pop
coming here to...
They think I'm crazy. What do you do? Why are you spending so much time when so few people can have such an effect on what you do? When you're in the pop world, it's the opposite. You're only successful if a lot of people, you know, go for it.
But now we seem to see, we have Paul Simon coming to Broadway with The Cape Man. We've got Elton John with The Lion King. Pete Townsend had been here with Tommy. You, of course, are becoming, 45th Street becoming Wildhorn Way with the Pimpernel and Jekyll and Hyde right next to each other. Why are rock and mainstream and pop composers now interested in Broadway?
Well, I'm not quite sure that they are yet. That's a big statement to make, and I haven't really seen that yet. And the reason I say that is because the gentlemen that you've just named, they're all either superstars, pop icons. You know, they're in a place in their career where it's much easier to take the shot of doing this as opposed to a younger artist that might say, well, if I do Broadway and it's not successful, how is that going to relate to the rest of my career? The Elton John score you're talking about, until he does Aida, which I believe he's working on.
That was really a movie score.
Right, it really was a movie score. And the Pete Townsend thing was written in 1968. So, you know, that's really not true yet. I'm hoping the culmination of what they're all doing, and maybe a little of myself as well, will open the doors a little bit. Someone called me the other day and said, Frank, you're a little bit like the first wave on the beach at Normandy. You're going to take a lot of shots, but maybe you'll have a beachhead and make it a little easier for some others. And, you know, as the creative director of Atlantic Theater, which is, you know, Time Warner's new company really dedicated to American theater music, I'm proud of that, and I'm proud if we can open a door here or there, because again, I'm interested in the future. I'm interested in what happens the next 20, 25 years, and where theater is going to go. And like I said, I think it has to. I think it has to have room for everything.
Well, the critics be damned. Frank Wildhorn is here to stay. Jekyll and Hyde is playing at the Plymouth Theater, and the Scarlet Pimpernel opens Sunday night at the Minskoff Theater. Frank, you've been a delightful guest. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Stephen Schwartz is the composer of two of the biggest Broadway blockbusters of all time, Pippin and Godspell. He also wrote Working and Children of Eden, and he has a new CD out that is called Reluctant Pilgrim, and we are delighted tonight to be joined by Stephen Schwartz.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming on.
Yes, sir.
A CD on which you sing, right?
Isn't that
this is
weird?
you performing.
What was I thinking?
Yeah, what were you thinking? What were you thinking?
Oh, you know, I had this bunch of pop songs that I had been writing over the last couple of years, basically because I was challenged by friends of mine who are pop writers and whom I was suggesting, well, wouldn't you like to write something for the theater? And finally, a couple of them said to me, fine, we'll try writing for the theater. Why don't you stop hiding behind characters and masquerading as hunchbacks and Indian princesses and come on out and write some things about yourself. So I sort of took the dare and started writing these songs. And then people started performing them, and I had to do demos of them to get them to the people who were performing them. And it was so much trouble doing these demos that I thought, you know, it would actually be only a little bit less trouble simply to do this as a record. And then I got a lot of encouragement from people who were hearing the demos and saying, we really like your voice. And people, it literally happened that people called me and said, we really like this guy you have singing that song. Who is he? Maybe we'd like to use him. And of course I was doing them, so I thought, well, all right, I'll put them all together in one place and put it on out there and see what happens.
Now, we are a theater show, so I neglected to mention
There's
two other
a
small shows, small movies you've written the
well, we
scores
won't
to
discuss them.
Pocahontas and
Only,
The Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Only the movies.
We just had Frank Wildhorn
right.
and Frank was talking about going from the pop world to the theater. Now,
Right.
you're sort of going from the theater, where of course you started,
Right.
to the pop world. Which is more satisfying for you? Because Frank said that he's infinitely more satisfied writing for the theater, writing for characters.
I'm not sure that I agree with him. They seem two different experiences to me. Well, when you write for the theater, I tend to sort of always, as my friends have accused me of, hide behind the characters. So it really becomes, everything becomes sort of autobiographical, or you sort of channel one part of you into that particular character. And then in the pop world, you kind of can't hide. But I think Frank's experience of the pop world is slightly different because he tends to write for other singers, and I'm basically doing this singer-songwriter thing, so I don't have to worry if it's commercial, and I don't have to worry if anybody else would record it, and so on. So it's a bit of a different part of the pop world.
So, Stephen, you started with Godspell right out of Carnegie Mellon, right?
Yes.
And then followed up by having your Carnegie Mellon show, Pippin, brought to Broadway and directed by Bob Fosse.
A historian, a theater historian on our
And then you
hands.
had Magic Show, 3 big hits.
Right.
Did that spoil you in a way to have 3 massive hits on Broadway by the time you were 27 years old?
Yeah, actually it did. I don't know if the word spoil is correct, but it was very weird. I was really young. It's very hard to handle that kind of thing. It sent me into all sorts of strange psychological spinning and turning, and there was a period of time when I got very burned out and didn't work at all. Sort of hit the Bjorn Borg syndrome or something of just suddenly thinking, I can't do this anymore. And it's sort of been, I think, a slow climb back into feeling that I actually can do this as a profession and not as a roller coaster ride.
Frank, just to go back to Frank Wildhorn for a minute, because he's been criticized for his pop scores. You came in for some criticism, too, early on. What is this that Broadway has, the Broadway establishment, against the pop sound?
Damned if I know. That's a good question.
Yeah.
What I do think is that I know when I started, which was considerably before Frank, right. There was a thought that you could not write a pop score for Broadway because of the lyric content, and that you wouldn't be able to illuminate character and so on and so forth. And I always felt that it was the lyrics and making sure that the music represented the character's emotions and that they were allowed to sing in that idiom, that it didn't seem out of style for them to sing in that idiom, and then to make sure that the lyrics were not pop lyrics, but actually had a theatricality, a drive through to them, perhaps a little bit more of a literate quality. And if you did that, then the music could certainly be contemporary music. And you know, some people have agreed with me over the years, and some people still don't.
Well, you were considered a revelation. I mean, I was around when Godspell hit, and you
the
were
old rebel. That's
yes, you had. And so then, as I said before, they picked up Pippin, and you worked with Bob Fosse. Now, I read somewhere that you had a stormy relationship with Fosse during
you could put it that
show.
way. Yeah.
Why was that?
Well, we're both strong flavors. We were both quite headstrong, and I think I would have handled that much better now. You know, after all these years, I find it quite easy to, and actually I quite enjoy dealing with the Jeffrey Katzenbergs of the world, you know, who are quite strong-minded in their own right. But at the time, I just didn't quite know how to deal with the director who was basically putting his stamp on absolutely every element of the production, and I thought, well, you know, actually I don't want the orchestration to sound like that in this place, or that's not really what I meant with the song. And plus, frankly, my feeling about Bob was that he was brilliant at some things and not so brilliant at other things, and the problem with him was you got them both. So you had to take the genius staging and the kind of theatrical wizardry, but there were also some really tawdry jokes and some really sloppy book stuff that he shoved into the piece, and I thought, you know, why can't we have the good stuff and kind of get rid of the bad stuff? He was certainly asking that of me and of Roger to keep the best stuff that we did and get rid of the bad stuff. Roger Herson, who wrote the script. So I don't know. I think in the end it was simply a matter of my being too young to deal with that.
You were 12 years old or something.
Just about. Yeah, I'll accept that.
Enfant terrible.
Kind of twice that, but nevertheless it was still pretty young, and I didn't know how to deal with such a thing. You know?
After you had the 3 big hit shows, and there was a period where everyone's sort of wondering, where was Stephen Schwartz? When could you write? Were you unable to write? Or were you just not writing? Were you looking for another hit Broadway musical?
No,
or were you tired of the arena?
I just stopped. I don't think it was a matter of not being able to write so much as it was a matter of just losing the desire. I think that my idealism and naivete and romanticism about what the theater was came up against the realities of what show business is, you know, and it is a business, and there is a lot of difficult stuff to deal with in terms of the egos you're dealing with and the personalities, and I just think I found that I think I got disillusioned, and it took me a while to grow up.
To become bitter and cynical like everyone else in the
theater? Yeah, and now
theater?
I'm bitter and cynical, and so I'm fine. Now I can work.
Do you think for a while that there was certainly no financial incentive after those musicals for you to write?
Well, I mean, it's true. I didn't have to write in order to eat, but it was never about that.
Yeah,
you know, I mean, God knows, as I overheard Frank say, there are easier ways to make money. So it's not. I don't think any one of us goes into any aspect of this business thinking, I know I'll do that in order to strike it rich. You know, you're really doing it for other reasons.
But the money has got to be good. I mean, if you look around sort of the Samuel French catalog or what high schools and colleges are doing across the country, everybody's still doing Godspell.
Well, yeah,
everyone's still doing Pippin. I mean, it must be nice to go to the mailbox and get the checks each week.
There's someone said, you know, you can't make a living in the theater, but you can make a killing, and it's true. I mean, that is really true. If you score big, and I was fortunate enough to have a couple of things score big, it really will. You can ride on that for pretty much for the rest of your life.
Are you surprised at the longevity of your first two shows?
Yeah, a little bit, I think. I thought they were so of the period that they might date, but they've turned out to be extremely flexible, and therefore they keep being updated and viewed in a new way, and that's kind of fun too. To every now and then I see a production and someone's done some weird '90s spin on stuff, and I'm like, oh yeah, I guess you could do it that way.
Are you looking for the next big hit musical? Do you want to have another big Broadway?
Oh, I don't really
smash?
think of it that way. You know, I have some other shows that I've written. You mentioned Children of Eden, which is sort of finishing its development process and is going to be at the Paper Mill Playhouse in New Jersey. It's of a rather impractical size for Broadway, so it may never get to Broadway at all. And I have some ideas for some new projects. It's been a while since I felt like writing for the theater, frankly, because I had so much fun in Hollywood, and I was treated very well, and I didn't have to fight and scratch and have wars about every single thing, and that was a relief. But now I could go back to the wars.
Have a lot of...
Isn't the abuse fun, though? I mean,
yeah, it is. It is. You just have to, you know, kind of lick your wounds and heal, and now I'm all healed, and I can go back and get beat up again.
And don't you have another big Disney project coming up?
Actually, I've done. It's not for Disney. It's for DreamWorks, the company that was formed when Jeffrey Katzenberg left Disney and formed this company.
And very
with
quickly,
Steven
that
Spielberg.
project is?
It's called Prince of Egypt, and it's an animated feature that comes out in November '98. Believe it or not, and my part is already done.
You're out of there.
You're out of there. Well, we hope you come back to the war that is Broadway, to the jungle that is Broadway.
I plan
and can,
to.
Fight great battles again. Stephen Schwartz, thanks for being our guest tonight on
Thank
Theater
you.
Talk.
My pleasure.
We welcome your questions or comments for Theater Talk. Thank you and good night.